And Disney was stuck with this idea that had, been handed down as kind of gospel that if you're doing live action and animation combo, you have to lock down the camera um, and do everything with lock off camera because otherwise the animation skids around a bit on the camera. Spielberg and Zemeckis absolutely rejected this as an idea. They said, you can't do good filmmaking without moving the camera. And so they then went on a kind of search to find out uh, who could actually do this. And one of the first people they'd talked to had been Chuck Jones, as great hero of the animation world. And Chuck had said there is only one person in the world who can do this movie, and this is Dick Williams, and you need to talk to him. Here is his phone number. And Chuck then called Dick and practically ordered Dick to do the movie.
I'm doing good. How have you been?
I'm all right. Yeah, ticking along. The movie business is a weird place at the moment.
It is. It is. I think in every different aspect, whether it's a narrative and doc on TV, everywhere it's just more or less the same. It's in a very strange spot.
Yeah, I have a live action script that I discussed with a stunt coordinator. I've got an actual breakdown of the visual effects work I'd need to do and the costing out of that. And I don't want to take it out. It's funny. It's one of those scripts that I feel like, oh, this is really saleable, but in the current climate, I just don't want to take it out because I feel like it'll get rejected by a whole lot of places that don't want to greenlight anything, and it'll just it'll have a bad smell on it because of that. You know.
Yeah.
On the other
Yeah,
hand, there's
no,
a whole lot of writers who I know of who, they're spending this year writing spec scripts because, there's a general survive until 25 ethos going on out there. And so I think the trouble is in 25, there's going to be a whole mass of spec scripts that people are going to be taking out. So I don't know what's the right smart thing to do.
I think right now is just it is one of those things that where you just have to sort of be prepared for anything and everything and just, have multiple things ready. But it's again when everybody will come out, then it's going to be very, very competitive as it always is, but probably a little bit more than usual.
Yeah, right. So who knows? Yeah.
How were your summer holidays?
It's okay. I did a brief trip back to England for like a couple of weeks and saw some friends and stuff, but it was pretty much a flying visit. Got to see my brother and his family, and but yeah, other than that, I've actually I have been extremely fortunate to be in full-time work at DreamWorks. I'm storyboarding on a couple of movies, and they've actually got the scheduling sorted out. So like one movie is running up for its screening, and the other movie gets going. So I'm just jumping from one movie to the other, which is kind of fun because there was a time, a couple of years ago when they got scheduling wrong, and it seemed like every movie they were developing came up to a screening at the same time, and that means all the storyboard artists are out of work at the same time, and
Right, right.
yeah, which is boring. But yeah, this is
Yeah.
fun, and I'm working. I can't disclose the movies, but I'm working with Tom McGrath, who did the Boss Baby movies,
Mm-hmm.
and on one picture, and Joel Crawford and Daniel Mercado, who directed Puss in Boots too. So I've worked with Joel and Daniel on a couple of movies. I worked with them on Prudes 2 and Puss in Boots 2, and I think they're amazing. They're really such tremendously nice guys to work with, as well as actually being very talented. And Tom is a guy I have known. I think I've known Tom for over 20 years. I can't remember when I first met him. I mean, he was a story artist. I think he was a head of story on the first Madagascar movie. So I guess I might have met him there. But anyway, oddly enough, it's the first time I've ever actually boarded for him as a director, which is very strange since we've, worked in the same studio alongside each other for a couple of decades.
Right. It is okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Is Tom McGrath? the same Tom McGarth. If it is Tom McGarth, if my memory serves me right. Animaniacs and Tiny Toons EP. Is that the same individual or no?
I don't know actually. It's McGrath,
Mm,
Grath. So
yeah, because I have been
I
trying to get a hold of his agents to speak about Animaniacs. It is Tom McGrath.
I did not know he'd done Animaniacs. I'm just
Hold
looking him up
on.
right now.
Maybe I'm wrong.
He
Maybe
he
somebody else.
he was he did live action boards for a while.
It's probably someone with a similar name.
He was on Ren and Stimpy show. I mean, he directed an episode way back. Um,
No, Tom Ruger. Sorry, my
yeah,
apologies.
yeah.
Yeah, make two different Toms. Yeah, no, that sounds about right with Madagascar. I think now my memory clicks in. But that's exciting. That's good. I'm looking forward to whatever those two projects are, and of course, Wild Robot, which I know that you didn't have any part of, but nevertheless, it looks like an exciting film. It's coming at
I
TIFF.
think that looks amazing. I
Yeah,
have enormous respect for Chris Sanders who created it. And I really do think he created it. I mean, he crafted the whole kind of shape of the thing, and it's got his fingerprints all over it. The sort of the feel and nature of the movie. Um, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how that comes out. I'm sadly I never worked on that movie, and I've worked on several of Chris's things before, so or at least a couple. But yeah, it was just I can't remember what I was on, but I was on Kung Fu Panda 4 when they were in the middle of doing that. So,
right.
but yeah, everything I've seen on it is just phenomenal.
That's awesome. No, I'm looking forward to it. I'm really, it's been a long time since I've been looking to an animated feature, either by DreamWorks, Illumination, or Pixar. This looks kind of like, I was talking to my kids the other day, yesterday, about it, and I was like, it kind of looks like, again, I'm not trying to say that it's a, imitation or anything, but it just has a feel of E.T. meets Iron Giant meets
Yeah,
Jungle Book meets Bambi. Like it just has everything of all those little bits and pieces and this into its original story.
yes,
Of
E.T.
course,
meets
based on
Iron
a book.
Giant meets Bambi. That's very good. Yeah.
Well, it just does has that feel, but look, and animation looks amazing. It has that Puss in Boots feel to it, and the voices sound amazing. Everything is just pinpoint, and the story, the heart, you can feel it in the trailer. You
Oh,
definitely can
I
feel
think it's
it.
going to be a total tearjerker. Yeah, the trailer was also Chris Sanders. The original trailer that the marketing department had come up with was apparently was I never saw it, but it was sort of an okay but fairly standard animation trailer. And Chris had because I saw him and I said that's an amazing trailer, and he said yeah he'd heard the piece of music like over a year ago, and he had this kind of idea for the trailer kind of bubbling along in the back of his head. And
Yeah.
yeah, just such a phenomenally emotional thing. So yeah, I think it's going to be a tearjerker.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Well, we didn't really plan any particular film to talk about on this podcast, but I'm just going to go with the flow and you tell me if
Sure.
you want to continue. We touched upon a few times in our conversation, in our several conversations on Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Mm.
Your those were your early years, right?
That
And
was
you talk,
practically the beginning of my career. Yeah, I'd been
yeah.
working in commercials for maybe 2 years before Who Framed Roger Rabbit came up. It was uh, a phenomenally lucky event for me.
Yeah, you also talked about how Spielberg stumbled into you, and you got the gig and all that. But moving along from that, up until that time, the only films that probably mixed live action with animation, to my knowledge, were Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Right.
And Mary Poppins probably did a better job than Bedknobs in my view, but
And the adult
nevertheless,
stuff as well, because there've been things like Gene Kelly and Jerry the Mouse dancing together. that was
Right,
done.
right.
There had been a few bits and pieces, and indeed, the early Alice comedies, which Walt Disney did, were a live action girl, but I think she was cut out and stuck onto an animation world rather than it being animation put into the real world. So yeah, and I think there was some
Yeah.
stuff that Max Fleischer did and so on. So yeah, it's a thing people had messed around with, but yeah, there was this kind of fear of it because trying to combine the two things, they were so distinctly different worlds. The very flat world of animations, painted cells, and even the very flat Technicolor lighting still looked far too dimensional compared to animation. Anyway, so what was the thing you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I've always wondered, and I've never actually looked into the depths of where the story originated from, like the idea of this character named Roger Rabbit, right? And then there's
Oh,
Baby
it
Herman.
was a novel. It was actually
Oh,
it
was
was
it? I didn't know
yeah
that.
yeah yeah. And I forget the name of the guy who wrote it. I think something rather Wolf. Gary Wolf. Um, but yeah, it was a novel. It was originally Who Killed Roger Rabbit, and it was a rather complicated thing. Eddie Valiant was the a detective, but Roger Rabbit is actually murdered at the beginning of the book, and then this kind of avatar shows up in Roger Rabbit's in Eddie Valiant's office, and the avatar is a thing that Toons create so that when they have horrible stunts where they get chopped into pieces or uh, a safe lands on them or that kind of thing. The avatar is just a kind of projection of the character, and so this is an avatar that's left over after Roger Rabbit has died, and he's only going to exist for like a day or two, during which time they have to solve the puzzle of who killed Roger Rabbit.
Mm,
And I guess that very sensibly they realized that idea was kind of complicated and difficult idea, and moved away from it. But it had been in development at Disney for several years prior to Spielberg and Zemeckis getting involved. And actually, I believe Zemeckis had been approached to direct the live action at an early stage, and he had turned it down. And at another completely separate stage, um, Spielberg had looked at the whole thing and not been that interested. And then it had come back to Spielberg, and as I understand it, Bob Z was in Spielberg's office and saw the script lying on his desk and said, "Oh yeah, someone should really get that and make it right." And so they then discussed it and basically went along to Disney and said, "Okay, we're the guys who are going to make this." Um, and essentially took it away from Disney. They looked at everything Disney had done in development, and Disney was stuck with this idea that had been handed down as kind of gospel that if you're doing live action animation combo, you have to lock down the camera, and do everything with lock off camera because otherwise the animation skids around a bit on the camera. And um, and Spielberg and Zemeckis absolutely rejected this as an idea. They said, you can't do good filmmaking without moving the camera. And so they then went on a kind of search to find out uh, who could actually do this. And one of the first people they'd talked to had been Chuck Jones, as great hero of the animation world. And Chuck had said there is only one person in the world who can do this movie, and this is Dick Williams, and you need to talk to him, and here is his phone number. And Chuck then called Dick and practically ordered Dick to do the movie. And so I remember, um, there'd been a Fanta commercial, the soft drink Fanta, that Dick had done, about 6 months to a year earlier. It's while I was there at the studio doing commercials. I didn't work on the Fanta commercial, but basically that had been shot with a moving camera, and it had been a bunch of kids playing soccer, and then the Disney animated characters. Fandra had done some deal with Disney, so Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, and I think um, I'm trying to think which other character, but anyway, they're literally running through this crowd of kids and kicking the ball about and stuff, and the camera's tracking, and uh, and so Spielberg and Zemeckis looked at that and said, well, okay, so it can be done, and um, and they then set about they shot a live action test. It was actually going to be, I think, 3 shots, and rather typically, Dick never got them finished. Uh, but but you could see even from the line test that it was like there was some actor standing in for Eddie Valiant, and they built this set of kind of rubble and broken stuff, and Roger comes down a set of metal stairs and then walks through this environment, and it's a tracking shot. I think it's a crane shot as well. It's a whole full 3D movement, and Roger goes behind like panes of broken glass and stuff like that. It was basically to test out all the possible things, and there's lighting from neon lights, and so there's rim lighting and all kinds of stuff, because it was not only going to be a test of the animation, it was also going to be a test of ILM's ability to put this whole thing together and light the characters to look like it was in the environment. And yeah, I remember Dick doing the animation for that. And then there was another shot that was with Jessica Rabbit. I'm not sure if that ever, I think that did actually finally get finished, but we were already in the process of making the movie by then. Um, but yeah, the that original Roger test, even in line test, even in black and white uh, photos of the live action and the animation just drawn in pencil, you could tell it was going to work. It was eye popping, because it was just like, well, there he is in this three-dimensional environment. And Dick was always an extraordinary draftsman, and so his ability to just draw things, happily moving around in space was really very, very impressive. Um, and then in his this was all done when we were still running the commercial studio. Um, yeah, funny little side story to that. That when Bobsey and Spielberg came to visit Dick in his studio this was in Soho Square in London. They had a reception. It was an old Victorian building. It looked like something straight out of Dickens. And you went through reception, and then there was a kind of an interior lobby where the production management people sat, and there was a whole wall that was a glass cabinet, and Dick had deliberately put all of the awards that he'd ever won, racked up in there. Because you had to walk through past this to get into the boardroom. So, if you're a client coming along to employ Dick Williams' studio, you walk past this kind of wall of fame, and you're intimidated by the time you get to the boardroom. So, Spielberg is walking past and goes, "Hey, Dick, you got a lot of awards here." It's like, the only thing you need is, oh, you're going to say an Oscar, but there was an Oscar because Dick had won an Oscar for Christmas Carol, the half-hour short version of Christmas Carol. So anyway, amusing little story, but yeah, he then won a couple more Oscars for Roger Rabbit. But yeah, so Dick proved that you could just move the camera however you like, which kind of freed the movie up. And I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of how they got the thing actually greenlit, but it was uh, I think it was phenomenally expensive. I remember there was a lot of you kind of heard the echoes of some very unpleasant conversations. And I remember Bob Z saying, I don't know, because Jeffrey Katzenberg was running Disney
Disney, yeah.
animation studio, well, at the whole studio then, and Bob Z saying, I don't know what Jeffrey's complaining about. He's getting one movie for the price of three.
Well, you kind of mentioned, you said one movie for the price of three, and I realized this last year. I found out. I mean, it was always in the back of my mind, but I looked up. Back to the Future came out in 1985,
Yeah.
right? Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 88, Back to the Future 2 89, 3 in 90, and Death Becomes Her in 92, and Forrest Gump in 94.
Mm.
In 9 years, he directed six films,
Yeah.
and that's unheard of, especially three movies in a row. I mean, granted, Back to the Future 2 and 3, you can say they were shooting simultaneously and whatnot, but still, and to have consistent hits one after another. Maybe Death Becomes Her didn't really do that well as they expected, but nevertheless, it's just amazing that how
But Death Becomes Her
he
was
was able
literally
to.
finding something to do while Tom Hanks lost weight, because they shot the first half of Castaway, and then Tom Hanks went on a crash diet for like 3 months, and they went away and shot Death Becomes Her while he was losing weight.
No, no, no. I'm gonna have to correct you. Castaway came out in 2000. I think you're mixing that up with What Lies Beneath, possibly. They did that. Tom, they
Oh,
did the
sorry, it was What
shooting
Lies
of.
Beneath. You're right. You're right. It was
Yeah,
What Lies
yeah,
Beneath was
yeah,
shot during Castaway. Yes.
yeah. But another example,
No, of
97
course,
Contact.
yes, yes. Death Becomes Her, the Bruce Willis and yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which was another movie that we forget now because that kind of visual effects work is so commonplace. But the visual effects work in that movie was astounding.
It It is. We saw my wife and I saw it recently, like 5, 6 months ago. I was blown away by the visual effects in that film. It was just
Yeah, it's still
amazing.
good, and yet you remember it was like that was made during the 90s. That was we're only a few years after The Abyss and the sort of groundbreaking stuff with the the water pseudopod, which Jim Cameron was never happy with, and it's amazing how much stuff is in that movie that's sort of still holds up actually.
It does. It does. It was something that's going back to Roger Rabbit. So the book that was called, I looked it up, it's called Who Censored Roger Rabbit. So that's news to me that it was
Oh,
based on a
oh,
book.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, no, it's
It
okay. I just
was
want
a
to correct it.
century ago.
I don't even know there was a book. I had never known. I thought it was an original idea.
Mm.
So, your particular work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, what scenes slash characters, you were
Okay,
responsible for
so yeah, what did I
storyboarding?
do on that movie? Uh, I I picked up and did a lot of the Maroon cartoon from the point where, like, the opening scenes of the Maroon cartoon,
Yeah.
Dick did all of those, and then there's a point where Roger looks over after the mother leaves, and you know, you better look after him, or it's back to the science lab for you, and uh, she goes out the door, and then there's a crash, and Roger looks around, and we slam zoom into the kitchen, and I picked up there with the baby crawling up the cupboards and going across the stove. There were a couple of shots done by other people. I remember Chuck Gamage, for instance, did several of the shots where baby is going across the sink full of washing up and sees the cookies. Um, but I both laid out and animated a lot of the stuff like the Roger on the rolling pin getting the kettle stuck on his head and
Mm,
smashing into the uh oh he went into the dishwasher, comes out of the dishwasher, the whole running around the room thing, um and crashing into the wall, the electrical socket, uh, you know, all of that. I'm just trying to think which way around it was. He goes into the electrical socket, and then you've got the chili bottle goes into the kettle, and that's why he runs around the room. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I laid out a great deal of that stuff right up until he comes out of the ironing board and all the knives are flying towards him. And that um, I think Phil Niblink picked up from there and did many of the shots after that. But the movie was very much given out on a sort of, we got a couple of shots here, you take this, here, you take that. So there's some stuff in the speakeasy where Roger and Eddie have both got the handcuffs on. So I did, for instance, a shot where can you hold still? And he comes around and holds the box and then has to zip back and put the handcuff back on. Um, but again, there's shots uh, in between those. There are shots that Chuck did and various other artists did. Um, so the only section I can claim as a big section, I did the entire scene in the movie theater,
Oh,
um, where um,
Bob
uh,
Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins meets up with Dolores, what's her name, and yeah. So yeah, I did that whole scene, which was it was quite remarkable to actually get the whole chunk to myself. Um, and there's a few other bits when Roger and Eddie go to the Maroon Studios, and Roger's left to watch out, and he gets banged on the head with the frying pan. Um, did that scene. Um, did I'm just trying to think. I don't think I did anything in the sort of final battle apart from my by the end of the movie I was just like desperate to get stuff finished, and so I ended up actually doing in-betweens for Tom Cito at one point. There's some of the big crowd scenes at the end. It was just like all hands to the pumps, and so they said, would you be prepared to do in-betweens? It's like, hey, sure, if you're paying me, I'm happy to do in-betweens.
That's awesome. And I remember, I distinctively remember, so I had just moved to Canada in 1990, and I remember going to 7-Eleven because that was like my little, that's where I used to play my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game from school going to home. And I remember going to 7-Eleven, they used to have this small VHS section, right? And I remember the two VHS cases that always stood out to me were Batman, the Tim Burton very first film, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit because of its colors and, the live action versus that. And I remember when I watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit the first time, what blew me away was even at that time, I still don't know what the terminology of it, but the animation was very like it had this softness to it, sharpness to it. It was very distinct from what I had ever seen before, like movies like Bambi and Jungle Book. But that scene when Baby Herman gets out of character and he's in the real world, I still remember that, and that just whoa, like I didn't even know what that film was about. I hadn't seen the trailer, and for me to just experience that right at that moment is something I can never forget because it fits in so perfectly throughout the film, the characters, the
Yeah.
animation, visual effects. It's awesome, and Christopher Lloyd, I think it's probably one of his best roles. I mean, I know he's known as Doc.
Extraordinary performance from Christopher Lloyd, who
Yeah.
I've only met once. Who was when I was working on Back to the Future 2, and they had a sort of launch party, and so Buddy and I went up and said hi to Christopher Lloyd, and he was terribly nice and saying, hi, and trying to have a conversation with him. He wasn't being unpleasant. He's almost monosyllabic. He's the quietest man ever. And he was very nice and he didn't want to move away or anything. It wasn't like we were, you know, embarrassing or occupying his time. He was just like hanging out, drinking a beer, friendly. But and I remember seeing an interview with him and oh God, what was her name who played Clara in Back to the Future 3?
Mary Steenburgen was it?
Mary Steenburgen, thank you, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at one point her saying, will you just let me get a word in edgeways? Because he just wasn't saying anything at all. Famously silent. And then he plays these just enormous characters. He does Doc Brown or he does something like Judge Doom, or indeed, the character he played on Taxi. It's so radically unlike him as a person. It's very, very odd. It's actually the only person I've met who's like that is was sorry, I'm having difficulty with nouns. It's early in the morning for me. Um,
It's okay.
uh,
Robin Williams?
Robin Williams, thank you. Yes, who uh, I visited the set of Hook, and Yeah, he's enormous when he's performing, and the moment he's not performing, it just switches off, and he becomes this really meek, nice guy, but kind of quiet, and you know, and it's just
I
where does it come from? Yeah,
I think it's a sign. I'm not trying to take away from any other actors or superstars and whatnot, but in my view, people who are like that, Philip Seymour Hoffman, I'm willing to bet was probably similar in that sense. I've never met the guy. I think Jim Carrey is somewhat similar too, that you are just so confident about your craft that when you come into the real world and you don't value who you are as an individual, you just value your character. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just sort of guessing based on what I see. It's an interesting thing that you can study and analyze. Why do people behave like that?
yeah. Whereas there's some actors who are just always on. They're just like they're doing their bit all the time. But
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, Christopher Lloyd, amazing, and his Judge Doom, uh, yeah, was kind of a fantastically uh, edgy, weird character. Because of course he was actually, spoiler alert, he is actually a toon. But yeah,
yeah. No, Christopher Lloyd is amazing, and I was talking about Jim Carrey. It's interesting you mentioned, and I was just reminded of this little incident. Jim Carrey is always like in his character, more or less, whenever you see his interviews and whatnot. I remember I was at TIFF in 2017 or 2016. One of his movies had premiered at TIFF, and our company had received some work through with Hollywood Reporter and Adobe, and we were doing some work. And this was a big, gigantic room where there was Hollywood Reporter booth, there was Adobe, there was Variety and everything. And all of a sudden you hear these heel boots making sound, and it was a wooden floor. And this guy walks in his leather pants, leather jackets, leather shoes, and it's Jim Carrey. And he walks over and he comes and stands right in front of me. And he goes, "How you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm fine, and how are you?" He's like, "I'm great, but how are you doing?" Like, "I'm fine." And he was really, really serious. And then he looks at me and he laughs and he gives me a hug. And everybody's like, "Do you know Jim Carrey?" I'm like, "No, I don't." But it was just his persona. I have never met the guy, but he was just so, he was trying to sort of not necessarily intimidate me, but maybe like try to get like a fan reaction out of me. That's my guess. And I didn't give him that. And I think he probably was like, okay, this is different. So, he went along with it. But again, people are like, some people have very interesting personalities off camera and they try to, portray one thing, but they're different in real life.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. That may have been some sort of, I need to kind of either dominate the room, or I need to kind of establish myself as a weird character. Yeah, it maybe it's a protection thing. It's a sort of like,
Maybe
I
I
want to
think
hide
that.
who I actually am. Yeah,
Yeah, it's I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I think that lot you just nailed it because I think that's what Robin Williams has probably been was like and Christopher Lloyd. But, amazing actors, all these individuals. Hats off to them. Um, Roger Rabbit, after the film came out, it came out with three short films. I think one of them was called Trail Mix Up, one of them was called Roller Coaster Rabbit, and the other one was called Tummy Trouble, which were all fantastic. I don't know if you've ever seen them. Um,
I've seen bits of them, but I don't think I've ever actually sat down and watched the whole thing of any of
Oh,
them.
they're
Yeah,
just like 5 minute pieces. They're like
yeah, no, I know what
on
they are.
Tom and
And
Jerry.
actually, after Roger Rabbit, I Jeffrey Katzenberg did actually talk to me about coming out to work at Disney, and that was one of the possibilities of things I might work on. But
But you ended
I,
up working with Katzenberg anyway later on.
yeah, yeah, having sort of taken a 5 year sojourn not to, yeah.
What do you think it is about Roger Rabbit that appeals to people besides animation, live action versus, animation
It's
mix?
interesting. I think it manages to appeal to both people who love animation and people who kind of hate animation. Um, and and I kind of include myself in the second category, weirdly. I've never really been a huge fan, particularly of wacky animation. Um, I'm capable of doing it because I understand how it works, but I've never been like a huge Tex Avery fan, and um, which is odd given the animation I did in Roger Rabbit. But um, and so I always found I kind of identified with Valiant in the movie. I was on his side of like, God, I hate these tunes, you know, and um, and so I think the movie manages to uh, both be a loving tribute to crazy cartoons and also sort of have a cynical attitude to them at the same time. Um, uh, but yeah, I think it's a sort of brilliant mixture of genres. It's like, if you took Chinatown and then put Bugs Bunny in the middle of it, that's what you're going to get. Um, so I think it's a cross genre thing which takes you by surprise and makes it so remarkable. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's like nothing you'd ever seen before. So
Yeah,
it was kind of a groundbreaking. Oh my God, you've got to see this movie. Plus, it was genuinely funny movie. Siemens and Price wrote a very funny, or many very funny scripts. Um, because that was another thing. They'd written an early script for the show, and like many people had done attempts at a script, and Bob went back and read all of them and ended up saying, okay, these guys actually, they've got the tone, they've got the flavor of this right, and so he ended up working with them uh, on all of the drafts of the final movie, which,
yeah,
as we said, was kind of remarkable at the time because that was the era when, oh, a good project deserves like four or five writers. Like, you've got to squeeze everything out of one writer and discard them, and then have another writer take a pass at it and squeeze everything out of them. And so to stay with the same writers through the project is kind of remarkable. But Bob's quite loyal in that regard. He has people he wants to work with. He continues to work with them.
yeah,
Um, it's like it's always the same composer on his music. Even I remember. Oh God, James Horner really um, uh, he tried hard to get in and write the music for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Bob said no, we're sticking with Silvestri.
yeah. Yeah, Alan Silvestri is amazing. I mean, aside from Robert Zemeckis' film, one of the music that I love of his that's very memorable is Predator, the original Predator that came out in the 1980s with
Yeah, it's funny.
Schwarzenegger.
You kind of forget that he did things like that. You know,
Yeah,
he's got a much broader range of stuff that he's done than in the sense he ever gets credit for. I mean, he does if you actually bother to look it up, but he's not one of those names that um, you know, like James Horner or John Williams, that you kind of instantly can list off a whole bunch of stuff that they did.
yeah. No, he's a great composer, and I he also did the one of the Spielberg films that came out recently because John Williams was busy. Ready Player One.
Oh
He
yeah,
did the music for
yeah.
that. Yeah. But I think going back to Robert Zemeckis, up until Death Becomes Her, I mean, even Forrest Gump was a little bit, comedy mixed in there. He's been like, I think he's a really good storyteller, along with the fact that he knows the comedic beats. I mean, his very, well, wasn't his first film, I think his second film, Romancing the Stone with Michael Douglas. I think it's one
There was used cars, and there
Used
was
Cars before that.
I want to hold your hand before that, which
Yes, this
about a
third
bunch of kids
film.
trying to get to the Beatles at Shea Stadium.
Yeah, but Romancing the Stone, I mean, it has that Indiana Jones sort of vibe to it, but it's still original and it's so funny. Again, I saw it recently, and there was
The
movie
amazing
that
thing
came out
about
last year.
the amazing thing about Romancing the Stone is that the studio hated it. After they'd shot it and they were in post-production, the studio really did not like it. They thought they'd got a complete bomb on their hands. And at the time, uh, Bob was developing Cocoon, and got fired off Cocoon because they hated Romancing the Stone so much. And that's why, um, uh, sorry, what's his name, got to direct Cocoon?
Ron Howard. Ron
Ron
Howard.
Howard, thank you. Yes. Um, and in fact, apparently, like basically Ron Howard stepped into all the development work, set design and production design and everything that had been developed by Bob Z, and took it over. But yeah, and then Romancing the Stone came out and was a stupendous hit. But it was a complete surprise to the studio, apparently. I mean, that's the story as Bob told it to me. So yeah, he so Cocoon should have been his movie. And when you watch Cocoon, you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, this got all kinds of Bob Zemeckis sort of fingerprints on it.
Yeah, it certainly does. And Romancing the Stone, there was a movie that came out last year, 2 years ago, with Sandra Bullock and um what's his name? Tatum.
Yes, yeah,
It was
and it,
called The Lost City. It was the same, almost similar premise to Romancing the Stone. I haven't seen it, but the trailer
and
suggested
they're
that
they're
before.
they're all in that sort of Indiana Jones vibe. But yeah, it was again a writer, and in this case it was yeah, Channing Tatum was like a male model who was basically the cover art for her
Yeah,
novels.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, great.
I quite enjoyed that film. It was sweet, fun stuff. It wasn't particularly, earth-shattering, but I thought it was fun.
I'll take a look at it. I haven't seen it because as soon as I saw the similarities, I'm like, I'm okay with Romancing the Stone. But now that you're mentioning it, I'll check it out, see how it is.
Yeah, I mean it's a
Uh,
sort of, it's a pizza night kind of movie. It's not a
yeah,
it's rush out and
tearjerker.
see it in a 70 millimeter print at your local art cinema.
Um, you so just to kind of wrap things up, Simon, you talked about two films at DreamWorks, which we can't talk about. Um, are they coming out the next year to 2, 3 years? What stage they are, do you know?
Yes. I, I I don't believe they've actually been greenlit yet, technically.
Hmm.
There's a whole weird thing about, everything has to, because DreamWorks is now a subsidiary of Universal, stuff has to be developed to a certain point where it can then be presented to the heads of Universal, and they
Yeah.
actually decide whether they're going to go ahead and finance the making of the movie and give it a release date and so on. So neither of these two, part of the reason I can't talk about them is because they haven't been announced, because they haven't actually been greenlit yet. I would be, in both cases, I would be both astonished and enormously disappointed if they weren't greenlit, because I think they're both actually brilliant movies. One is based on a comic book, fairly obscure comic book, and the other is actually an original idea. But both of them are clearly, open to being a franchise with sequel possibilities built in, um, and are, you know, richly entertaining movies with, masses of comedy and fun characters, and also strong drama. And yeah, so uh, what do I know? But it would seem to me it would be crazy not to make these movies. But you know, I've worked on a few movies at DreamWorks that ended up not getting made. They do happen, but anyway, we will see. Fingers very much crossed, though.
Well, I'm looking forward to those films pending they're greenlit, and I hope they are greenlit. After the success of Wild Robot, which I know it will be successful critically and box office, um, I people are looking in the audience is craving for different stuff now. There's all
Yeah.
these remakes and superhero and same old. So, they're craving for original idea, kind of going back to what we were talking about, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So, and I think Wild Robot is going to offer that, and I hope the ones that you are working on that get greenlit eventually will offer that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to see. Uh, I think DreamWorks have been doing a good job recently. I got to say, I wasn't terribly pleased with the way that uh, the what was the Oh gosh, the
Kung Fu
movie
Panda
before
4?
sorry.
Kung Fu Panda 4? Are you
No,
talking
no,
about?
no.
Or
That,
no?
that I thought was pretty good, and I thought Puss in Boots 2 was amazing. Ruby Gillman. I like
Oh,
her
right.
obviously, but I think Ruby Gillman kind of got. I think all the drama and excitement of that movie kind of got squished out of it, and I feel sorry for it because I did do some work on the show, and I just feel it could have been that could have been a whole lot more exciting. Um, but I think the recent movies by DreamWorks have generally been on an upswing. So yeah, and I think these two are going to be good.
I I I bet, and it's funny. I was actually thinking about a couple of days ago Shrek 5, and I was thinking in my head, what would that possibly be about? Like, is Shrek and Fiona and Donkey, are they like older characters? And then I think it was a couple of days ago, I discovered the day after that, I discovered online on the Shrek's official Instagram channel, somebody they shared like a concept art where they are shown as older Shrek and Fiona and Donkey. Now I don't know if this is official or not. It is posted on their official account. But that would be interesting to see if that's the case, because that kind of like adds a kind of like meet the parents and meet the Fockers and meet the little Focker in that sort of realm. I don't know if you have seen it, but
I haven't seen anything of it yet. I think they've had one screening or one partial screening so far. I know some people who are working on it, but I can't really comment on where it's going or what's going on with it. But
no worries. I wasn't baiting you or anything. I was just talking out loud.
yeah,
Uh,
it's I hope they cleave to what makes the franchise work. And in a way, yeah, Shrek growing older, and we've already seen him with a young family. Um,
yeah,
I mean, the interesting thing is if his family gets older, then what differentiates him from Grug in Crudes, because in many ways Grug is very much the same sort of character as Shrek is.
that's true. That's true. I never thought of that. That's so true. That's so
Yeah.
true.
But anyway,
Awesome.
yeah, we will see what
Well,
happens.
100%. Well, this has been great, Simon. Always lovely chatting with you. I might be popping in LA later this month or early next month, and if you're around, maybe we can just grab a
Think
cup
about
of tea
coffee,
as we
yeah,
always do. Yeah.
yeah, that would be fun. All
Awesome.
right,
Thank you so much, Simon. Take care.
okay, I'll see you.
Bye bye.